An Ebola outbreak in eastern Congo spread undetected for months before it was confirmed, growing into one of the largest on record. And the dismantling of American foreign aid is central to why the response fell so far behind. When Mumbere Saidi fell ill in Mongwalu, a gold mining town in the hills of eastern Congo, it looked like malaria. As his condition worsened, his relatives carried him from clinic to clinic. 6 in all, his brother said, searching for a cure. Nothing worked. After he died, neighbors gathered outside his hillside home, where banana groves give way to twisting footpaths, and counted their dead. 5 people on that one street, gone. Within days, Red Cross workers in sealed protective suits arrived to remove his disinfected body. By then, the disease that killed him had a name, and the name was Ebola. Ebola is not a flood or an earthquake. It is among the rare catastrophes a capable state can almost always contain, because the virus moves slowly, and the response is well understood. The Democratic Republic of Congo has run that response many times. In 2022, an outbreak there was caught within 48 hours and ended with a single death. The current outbreak had been building in the mining region around Mongwalu well before anyone identified it. The World Health Organization was alerted on May 5th to a high-mortality unknown illness there, with deaths among local health workers. The disease was not confirmed as Ebola until May 15th, by which point it had been spreading for weeks, and by some estimates for months, before anyone knew to look for it. It has since grown into one of the largest Ebola outbreaks on record. By mid-June, the Congolese Health Ministry counted 676 confirmed cases and 136 deaths across the DRC and neighboring Uganda, with the totals still climbing. According to CDC modeling reported by NPR, if too few cases were isolated within 2 days of symptoms, the outbreak could climb toward 20,000. Atul Gawande, a former senior official at the U.S. Agency for International Development, drew the contrast plainly. The 2022 outbreak was caught in 2 days. Now, he told the Washington Post, we are way behind. Eastern Congo is hard ground for any outbreak response. The region is torn by armed conflict and mass displacement. Its mining towns draw a mobile population back and forth across porous borders. Health workers have been attacked, and communities have long-standing reasons to distrust outside authorities. All of that made early detection more important, not less. And early detection is precisely the capacity the United States had spent 2 decades building, and then, in the first months of 2025, took apart. For years, American personnel and dollars formed the connective tissue of the global system that detects diseases like this one before they spread. Much of the work was unglamorous and ran through USAID and the CDC, disease surveillance in remote areas, laboratory capacity, the transport of samples to distant labs under controlled temperature. The current outbreak is caused by the Bundibugyo strain of Ebola, less lethal on average than the more familiar Zaire virus, but one for which there is no approved treatment or vaccine, and one that standard field tests often miss. Confirming it requires getting samples to a central laboratory intact and at the right temperature. That last task would matter. According to the New York Times, nearly a month passed between the first death and confirmation of the outbreak, in part because initial samples reached the central government laboratory at the wrong temperature, a task USAID had previously overseen. The brakes on transmission failed too. Aid groups including CARE and the International Rescue Committee, funded by the U.S. government to train communities in safe burial practices. One of the most important interventions for slowing Ebola's spread were forced to lay off the community health workers who did that work. In past outbreaks, the American government would have mobilized trucks of medical equipment within hours of detection and helped lead the response. This time, that surge came slower and smaller. The numbers describe a withdrawal. American assistance to the DRC fell from roughly $1.4 billion in 2024 to $430 million in 2025, with only about $21 million allocated for 2026. In January 2025, by executive order, the United States, the world's largest donor, announced its withdrawal from the World Health Organization, reducing its access to the primary international system for outbreak notification and coordination. Jeremy Keenandick, who worked on Ebola response at USAID during the Obama administration and now leads Refugees International, compared the present outbreak with the catastrophe that killed more than 11,000 people in West Africa a decade ago. This one, he said, had more momentum at time of detection than that one did. The cuts had many authors: the White House, the State Department, DOGE, the political appointees installed atop USAID, but none did more to drive them than Russell Vought, who directs the Office of Management and Budget, the agency through which every dollar Congress appropriates must pass. Russ is now at the helm, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced, when Vought took charge of winding down USAID. "Congrats, Russ." A former OMB employee described the office as like a giant funnel that everything has to go through in order to happen. And in 2025, blocking the funnel became an instrument of policy. The same executive order that pulled the United States out of the WHO named the OMB director among the officials directed to carry it out. The severance from the world's alert system ran, on paper, through Vought's office. The public face of the demolition was Elon Musk, whose Department of Government Efficiency supplied the chainsaw and the headlines. In February 2025, Musk boasted on X that his team had spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. But the direction, according to OMB veterans and others close to the process, came from Vought. The clearest window into how the cuts were made is a meeting on February 12, 2025, reconstructed by ProPublica. USAID staff had proposed cutting foreign aid by half. Vought was unsatisfied and asked what a much larger reduction would mean. A career official answered directly. Less humanitarian aid would mean more people would die. "You could say that about any of these cuts," Vought replied. A person familiar with the meeting described his reaction as blasé. He wanted spending on foreign aid, he said, as close to zero as possible, on the fastest possible timeline. Analysts left the room shaken. "It was the day that broke me," one of them said afterward. None of this was an accident of haste, and the proof is a matter of congressional record. In 2018, during an earlier stint at OMB, Vought pushed the largest rescission request in decades, an attempt to claw back more than $15 billion that Congress had already appropriated. Among the specific cuts he sought was money for USAID's Ebola response. The measure failed in the Republican-held Senate by a single vote. 7 years before Mongwalu, in other words, Vought tried to defund America's Ebola response capacity and was stopped by one senator. In 2025, there was no one left to stop him. What changed between those two moments was a legal theory built in the intervening years, designed to remove the senator from the equation entirely. A rescission is the lawful narrow way for a president to cancel money Congress has appropriated. And it carries a catch. Congress has to agree. That is the route Vought tried in 2018, and it is the route that failed by one vote. Impoundment is the claim that a president may skip that step, may simply decline to spend money Congress has ordered spent. The maneuver has a history. President Richard Nixon withheld billions appropriated for environmental cleanup in the early 1970s. The courts undid him, and in 1974, Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act, which outlawed the practice and left only rescissions, requiring congressional sign-off in its place. For half a century, the act was treated as settled law. The Government Accountability Office, the nonpartisan congressional watchdog, has deemed the new administration's impoundments illegal. The project, in essence, was to revive a power a bipartisan Congress had buried after Watergate, and to use it, this time, on the money that buys diagnostic tests and body bags. Vought has not hidden his contempt for the civil servants whose work he set out to defund. "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected," he said in a private 2023 speech. "When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work, because they are increasingly viewed as the villains." He is also among the few prominent figures to embrace the label Christian nationalist. "I am a nationalist," he has said. "We were meant to be a Christian nation." In that worldview, a disease surveillance program in Africa registers not as a national interest, but as the indulgence of a government he regards as illegitimate, spending, in the campaign formulation he served, on people who have no respect for us. The warnings were explicit, and they came from inside. Before the cuts were carried out, USAID's own global health leadership projected the toll in memos later obtained by ProPublica. Up to 166,000 additional deaths from malaria, a 30% rise in tuberculosis cases, 200,000 children paralyzed by polio over a decade, 1 million children left untreated for severe malnutrition. The cuts went forward anyway. And inside the agency, Ebola was not merely sidelined by oversight. Staff were instructed to sideline it. Nicholas Enrich, the acting global health chief, testified to Congress that personnel were told to deprioritize activities related to neglected tropical diseases, Mpox, polio, Ebola, and any monitoring and surveillance activities. He testified that a Trump appointee, Tim Meisberger, had dismissed an active Ebola outbreak in Uganda as a scam because there had been only one death, a judgment that ignored the incubation period that all but guarantees more. Musk's own account, offered at a cabinet meeting, captured the recklessness at the other end of the blade. One of the things Doge had accidentally canceled very briefly, he admitted, was Ebola prevention. But, he said, it had been quickly restored, with no real interruption. Public health experts and USAID workers said this was false. The agency's Ebola prevention work had been frozen since the agency was dismantled. The man wielding the cuts did not know what he had cut, and was wrong about the repair. What remains is the arithmetic of a missed window. The containment math is unforgiving. Catch and isolate cases within 2 days of symptoms, and the outbreak stays small. Miss that window, and it climbs into the thousands. The 2022 outbreak was caught within 48 hours. This one spread, undetected, for months. Conflict, displacement, and mistrust all made it harder to fight. But the factor public health experts keep returning to is the one that did not have to happen. The early warning and response capacity the United States had built over 2 decades and then dismantled in a matter of weeks by men who had come to believe it should never have existed. On that hillside in Mongwalu, the neighbors who gathered outside Mumbere Saidi's home already understood what the laboratories took a month to confirm. 5 people on their street were dead, and the count was rising, and so was the virus. Washington did not vanish from the response. Emergency money was pledged and CDC scientists were dispatched. But it came late and thin, months after the prevention that was supposed to make it unnecessary had been cut away. For the first time in 20 years, the country that built the world's early warning system for outbreaks like this one was reduced to playing catch-up to an outbreak it would once have caught in days.